actually scared anybody. So I was on Netflix and I basically fell down the rabbit hole of watching a bunch of horror movies since we're all going through this quarantine situation together and people are looking for things to do. So after I was done going through so many movies, I was like, these are some of the movies that I watched on Netflix that I kind of enjoyed and maybe you'll enjoy them too. So let's get into it. And they're not going to be in any like order of best to worst. I'm just going to list them off in the order of how I watched them. First movie I watched was The Autopsy of Jane Doe. Now this movie came out in 2016 and it's directed by Andre Oradale. I'm pretty sure I'm not saying that right. And it stars Emile Hirsch and Brian Cox as Tommy and Austin Tilden, and they run their own mortuary. They're coroners, and one day an unidentified body, Jane Doe, is dropped off in their mortuary, and on the outside, the body looks completely normal. But once they open her up to try to figure out the cause of death, that's when things get really weird, and it's up to the two of them to basically try to solve the mystery of what killed Jane Doe. And yeah, I first saw this movie a while ago, but I decided to rewatch it again. And even on the second viewing, like, this movie was very enjoyable to watch. The fact that this movie essentially only followed two characters, like, the strength of this movie is strongly driven by the performances of Emile Hirsch and Brian Cox. But not only just that, but then just the unraveling mystery. What happened to this Jane Doe character and what is the story that is trying to be told? Because again, just like I mentioned, like, things start to get incredibly weird as this movie just goes on, and you're just watching like, what is happening right now? And the score for this movie is pretty creepy. Like, everything about this movie is just engrossing, and you're on the roller coaster ride from start to finish. And just the level of atmosphere and creep factor that's in this movie, because essentially you're in one location for the entire movie. You're in the mortuary, and with the way the director did it, it made this essentially innocuous house, so to speak, very creepy, almost in a Resident Evil 1 type of way, and played the video game where you were just in a mansion, but that mansion was creepy as hell. But yeah, Autopsy of Jane Doe, I would definitely say is a blockbuster. Next movie on the list, Geralds Game. This movie is a Netflix original based off a Stephen King book of the same name, and it's directed by Mike Flanagan, who actually directed one of my favorite movies of 2019, Dr. Sleep. And this movie is starring Carla Gugino and Bruce Greenwood as husband and wife Jesse and Gerald Burlingame, and they go away for a holiday vacation in their cabin in the woods to have some alone couple time. When you're trying to get away for the holidays, or you're going on a mini honeymoon or a staycation, and you're married or you're in a relationship, what do you want to do? You want to have sex. But if you're married for a long time, you kind of want to change the sex up because you get a little bored, so they decide to engage in a little bit more kinky sex games. And I'm just like, I'm into this movie already. Oh my. And so one of the things that they do is Gerald handcuffs his wife to the bed while he decides he wants to have his way with her. Well, have his way with her he didn't, because while he's on top of her, he suddenly falls over and dies of a heart attack, leaving his wife completely handcuffed to the bed in the middle of nowhere. And now Jesse's stuck to the bed with a dead husband, trying to figure out how she's gonna get out this situation. She's gonna have to use the bathroom, she's gonna get hungry, she's gonna get thirsty, and some other stuff happens. And this is a movie that works solely based on the strength of Carla Gugino's acting, because just like I mentioned, her husband eventually dies, and that's not a spoiler because it's in the trailer. And so because of that, she's by herself, and in many ways it's very I Am Legend in that aspect where Will Smith was by himself the whole movie. So if Will Smith didn't capture you in his performance, the movie would have been very boring. And it's the same thing with this movie. Like, if Carla Gugino, I need to learn how to say her name. Hold up. I just looked it up. So I was right. Carla Gugino. Where was I? Oh yeah. If Carla Gugino's performance was weak in any way, this movie would not have been as enjoyable in the slightest. And I know one thing. This movie kind of solidified my hesitation to getting tied up to the bed. I'm paranoid as it is, and I've already had the thought where I was like, well, if you tie me up and you suddenly die, what's gonna happen? And then I saw this movie in 2017, and I was just like, oh, hell no. So now I'm definitely not getting tied up. So a cautionary tale, folks, you involve yourself in some kinky sex games, you may end up in a much worse off situation than what you bargained for. Gerald's Game, I would say, is another blockbuster. And I'm not gonna bury the lead on this one. This is another movie I consider a blockbuster, and it's also directed by by Mike Flanagan. And this movie came out in 2016. He actually co-wrote this movie with his wife, Kate Siegel, and she's also in the starring role as Maddie Young. Hush. And this was A Quiet Place before A Quiet Place, because Kate Siegel's character, Maddie Young, she's a best-selling author and she's deaf, and she lives in a house in the woods. Again, Matt Flanagan with these houses in woods. But this time, instead of her being involved in some kinky sex games, she ends up being hunted down by a deranged man wielding a crossbow, hunting her in her own house. And she has to figure out a way to escape this man and survive the night when she can't even hear him coming. And for all she knows, he could be directly behind her. And yeah, this movie, like, again, talking about the performances, like, this movie was a butt clencher. I was squeezing for dear life as if I was running to the nearest bathroom, trying to hold on to as much as I could until I got to the bathroom. Like, this movie was suspenseful as hell. And most horror movies are no longer than 90 minutes. And the way this movie just gets into the plot is in a very unexpected way. And I was just like, oh my God. And the way this movie unfolds, like, I noticed there's a theme for these first three movies in that with Hush, it's just the main character, Maddie Young, and the killer. So these first three movies are really all about isolation and being isolated in these crazy circumstances. And will you be able to make it through? How will you make it through? And that's the thing that made these movies very interesting. And then not only that, just the performances for these first three movies, the score for Hush, and also the sound mixing, because you have to jump between the fact that only Maddie is deaf. There are certain moments where there's absolutely no sound, so the director wants to put you in Maddie's shoes. But then on the flip side, it's a horror movie, and part of what makes horror movies frightening is the sound, is the score, and just the interweaving of both of those dynamics. Like, this made for a great movie. One thing I will say, there is one thing that happens in this movie that kind of disappointed me, not to the point that it took away my rating for the movie, because like I said, I still consider this movie a blockbuster, but this is one of those moments where I feel like less is more, and there's something that they reveal or they do with the villain where I was like, I wish they didn't do that. I wish they didn't show that. The other way would have been way more creepier, because again, less is more. Well, and if you end up watching the movie and remember what I said, maybe I think you'll be able to figure it out. Next movie on the list. What number is this? This is number 4. So number 4 is Insidious, and this is a movie most people have probably seen already. My first time seeing it was during this Netflix binge, and so maybe there are more people on here that are watching this that probably haven't seen it. But Insidious came out in 2010, and it's directed by James Wan, who also did Aquaman and the Conjuring movies, and it's written by Lee Winnell, who actually wrote and directed one of my favorite movies of 2018, Upgrade, and he also wrote and directed my favorite theatrical release of the year, because essentially 2020's been canceled, so only a small handful of movies actually came out in the theaters this year, but that's Invisible Man. Insidious stars Patrick Wilson and Rose Byrne as Josh and Renee Lampert, and their son Dalton. He ends up getting stuck on the astral plane in this place called the Further, which is a place where dark spirits gather. Well, because his body is now uninhabited, it now leaves him open for these dark spirits to possess his body and become part of the real world now. Now it's up to Josh and Renee to figure out a way to get their son back before these demons come in, and stopping one demon in particular who's way more malevolent than all the others. And while watching this movie, I know this movie came out before The Conjuring, but I saw The Conjuring movies first, and I was like, Insidious was more or less his training wheels before he did The Conjuring movies, because a lot of it had the same exact beats, let alone the fact that Insidious starred Patrick Wilson and The Conjuring also had Patrick Wilson. But I would say that I liked his execution in The Conjuring more than I liked his execution in Insidious. Now, that's not to say that I disliked Insidious, but because I saw The Conjuring first, I kind of have more of an attachment to that than I do Insidious. But this movie was still pretty good. And during the movie, when they started talking about the Further and Dalton being trapped in another realm, again, I know this movie came out first, but I couldn't help but say Stranger Things, because I saw Stranger Things first, and you think about Stranger Things and Will being trapped in another realm, and that realm being called the Upside Down. But yeah, but Insidious was fun. I'm not going to say too much about it, because I'm pretty sure a lot of people have already seen the movie, considering it was such a huge blockbuster hit, and it ended up spawning 2 additional movies. But still enjoyed it, and based on that ending, I'm like, oh, I definitely want to see part 2, but unfortunately part 2 is not on Netflix. So for me, I would say Insidious is a hit. Number 5. Now this movie came out in 2016 and is based off a book of the same name, and it's called The Girl with All the Gifts. And the only prominent actor that I know from this movie is Glenn Close, but the main protagonist for this movie is this little girl named Sania Nanua. And this movie takes place in a dystopian future where humanity has essentially been wiped out and turned into zombies by a parasitic fungus, cordyceps, which is actually a real life fungus which does turn creatures into zombies, but it doesn't affect humans. It only affects insects, specifically ants. But it's actually the same concept and the same fungus that you deal with if you played The Last of Us video games on PlayStation by Naughty Dogs. And so with that said, this is essentially a zombie movie, but the difference between this and most other zombie movies is that they actually try to ground it in science. They actually explain the genesis of the zombification. In most cases, like The Walking Dead and all other properties, they don't really explain how they became zombies. They just say it doesn't matter, we just need to survive. The thing that always creeps me out about zombies is the zombies that can run. Like the zombies like the ones in The Walking Dead or Buffy or any other zombie show, or even Resident Evil where they're just slugging along. That doesn't creep me out or scare me as much as the ones that are busting out into breakneck speed chasing you down, like Train to Busan, which is another movie I recommend that you watch. It's also on Netflix. Those type of zombie movies creep me out even more, and that's what these zombies were. These were the running zombies, and I was just like, oh goddamn. But with that said, I feel like this is a zombie movie unlike any other type of zombie movie you've ever seen, because in this world there are a bunch of children, and these children may hold the key to saving humanity. More specifically, this little girl named Melanie, the girl with all the gifts. But that's really all I'm gonna say about that. This movie was very interesting, and I wouldn't necessarily call this movie a horror movie. I would just more or less call it a sci-fi thriller, but it was in the horror section of Netflix, and there's blood and gore and murder in it, so I guess I'll say it's a horror movie. The thing about this movie that was interesting is it makes you question humanity's place in the world and whether humans are as special as you think they are. And then also, not even just that, what do you consider sentient life? And it makes you think about human narcissism, how we think the world just completely revolves around us, and it doesn't. Like, even when we think about just our language, where we keep saying, oh, like climate change will destroy the world, and it's like, no, the world will be fine. It's just us that'll be wiped out. And in some ways, it does make you question humanity's role within the world, while also being very gory and bloody on top of that. So I would say The Girl with All the Gifts is a high hit. Number 6. This movie came out in 2019, and it was supposed to debut in theaters, but for whatever reason, it didn't come out in theaters, and it went straight to Netflix. And this movie is called Sweetheart, and it's directed by J.D. Dillard, and it stars Kiersey Clemons, who was actually one of the stars in one of my favorite movies of 2015, Dope, which was directed by Rick Fuyima. Clemons stars as a woman named Jen, who washes up as the sole survivor of a boat crash on a deserted island. And now she's trying to figure out a way to not only survive on this island, but also figure out a way to escape and get back to civilization. Well, things end up not being so cut and dry, and where she thought she was alone, turns out she's not so alone after all. And I don't know, I would say this movie is Castaway meets Friday the 13th. This is another isolation movie, and it kind of puts you in a situation where you're just like, despite enjoying the movie, I will say though, like once they actually showed you what the creature was, I was a little disappointed in the design of the creature. And then considering that Kiersey Clemons is a black woman in this movie, there's something that they reveal about her character and her backstory that kind of made me go, oh come on, why do they have to go this route? It irked me a little bit. It probably wouldn't irk other people as much as it did me, but that's just me. And then like I said, the design of the creature, I would say Sweetheart is a minor hit. I still enjoyed it, but those two things made me enjoy it less. Next movie on the list is Killer Clowns from Outer Space. This movie came out 3 years after I was born, so I've seen clips of the movie growing up, but I've never actually sat and watched the entire movie until now. And this movie, in today's eyes, just came off as absolutely cheesy and incredibly ridiculous, but I still enjoyed it. And with this movie coming out in 1988, obviously the effects don't hold up as well, but I could definitely see why this movie is a horror classic. But this movie was definitely a product of its time, like not even just in the fashion and the hair, but a lot of 80s, like if you go back and watch a lot of 80s movies, the acting is just so melodramatic and it reminds you of a soap opera. Like all of their emotions and acting choices are just so over the top. And it's like, look, man, I'm not gonna take it anymore, man. And I don't think this movie is supposed to be taken as seriously as, say, something like a Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, at least earlier Nightmare on Elm Street. I think you're supposed to have somewhat of a fun time with this movie. After all, killer clowns from outer space. Come on now. I definitely laughed while watching this movie and thought it was ridiculously over the top, but it was ridiculously over the top in a fun way. And also, there are many people that do have clown fear. I'm not one of them, but maybe one of you are. And now, final movie on the list is called The Girl on the Third Floor. Now, this movie was directed by Travis Stevens and it stars CM Punk. And he's playing a man named Don Koch who's trying to start a brand new life with his wife far away from Chicago in the suburbs. This movie is your typical haunted house movie, but the thing that makes this movie interesting is that all the special effects in this movie are all practical. And I feel like more times than not, too many movie studios and directors always fall into the CGI aspect of special effects, even to the point where if a person is bleeding, instead of using practical blood, they'll use CGI blood, and you're just like, why? Like something like a Spider-Man, I understand if you use CGI because you can't use practical effects of Spider-Man swinging through New York City. But that's the thing that makes Star Wars or even like The Walking Dead so compelling, is the fact that all of the effects, the zombies, the deaths were all practical and they look so much better, especially when you do a combination of practical and CGI. Now, I will say though, once you get to like the third act of the movie, things start to get really weird. It kind of took me out of the movie a little bit. And also, you know, CM Punk is mostly known as a wrestler, and so his acting isn't all that great, but it wasn't completely terrible. But overall, I would say The Girl on the Third Floor, even though I enjoyed it, I would say this is the lowest rated movie on this entire list, and I would say it broke even, but I would still say check it out. So yeah, so there you have it. What is that? 8 movies on Netflix that I suggest you check out if you're a horror fan. And with that said, if you are a horror fan, do you maybe have suggestions for movies that I should check out that maybe I haven't seen yet? Or if you've seen any of the movies that I did talk about, what did you think about them? Let me know down in the comment section below. Also, if you can, hit that thumbs up button and like this video to really help out the channel. And if this is your first time watching one of my videos, please check out the other videos on my channel. And if you like what you see, please subscribe for more and hit that bell notification button so you're alerted every single time I post a new video. And tell your friends, families, and neighbors about my channel to help me continue to grow. And as always, I'll catch you guys next time.